whether we can say COVID, Black Lives Matter that has happened in America, it's a wake-up call not just for African American people, it's a wake-up call for all of us as human beings.
And it took me to a place where I was just reading a sports article, really. I thought it was just about sports. No, it was my favorite sports writer, who was a black man, who was talking about, hey, why is it my white friends can talk to me about the NBA Finals, they can call me and have a chat about anything in the sports world, but this really important topic comes up, and then where are they? And I read that and I went, I don't want that to be me.
I went to a high school that had one African American in my graduating class. I had no relationship to understand any of the issues and the pain and the struggle, you would get in relationships of friends.
If we are going to have a conversation about what is happening right now, we're going to have a conversation about racism. It exists in schools. Schooling is an institution in this country. It exists in schools.
Now we acknowledge the racist history of felon disenfranchisement in this country. We acknowledge that. But we did not allow ourselves to be just defined just by that moment in history.
When we talk about, again, the public trust and reconciliation and the power of recognizing mistake and being accountable for mistakes, that's not just individually, that's systems, institutions.
In my case, my mother did ask me, had I committed that crime? And I did tell my mother I did, and my mother had me arrested. So I knew that I was responsible for something. I knew that I had to take accountability. And that's the thing that I'm actually saying that all of us need to do. Have the courage to say you're responsible for what you've done, and then have the courage to do something different. That's what reconciliation is. That's where restoration has to happen. Restorative justice is about that. I've been asked on more than one occasion why 67 minutes and what is its association with Nelson Mandela International Day. For me, 67 minutes is actually the heart of what Nelson Mandela Day is. It represents his 67 years of sacrifice and struggle for freedom, justice, and human rights. I can't think of anything better that we can do than to honor that kind of legacy. So this year, we have put together a documentary which poses a question: what in this historic moment, with overlapping crises of COVID-19 and civil unrest, what from Nelson Mandela's legacy could they draw from that's instructive in this historic moment? And specifically, how has the issue of systemic racism impacted them? The goal is to challenge people to be reflective about their own truth, to challenge people to be courageous with sharing their truth in a way that uplifts others.
As you virtually celebrate Nelson Mandela International Day, you should not lose hope, because the power is within all of us to make this a better world. It is even worse with the issue of systematic racism in the US, but it's a problem that plagues the whole world, not just the US. Even us as South Africa still experience systematic racism, and not to mention the issue of those who are poor, who do not have anything, and it's worse for them under this pandemic. However, as I say, I'd like to read you words of comfort from my dad, Nelson Mandela, who in April 26, 1990, uttered these words: "Our single most important challenge is to help establish a social order in which freedom of the individual will truly mean the freedom of the individual. We must construct a people-centered society of freedom in such a manner that it guarantees the political liberties and the human rights of all our citizens, not just a few. Our definition of freedom is the freedom of an individual, and it must be instructed by the fundamental objective to restore human dignity of all citizens in the world. This requires that we speak not only of political freedom, but freedom from want, freedom from hunger, freedom from deprivation, freedom from ignorance, because that's why we have racial injustice, because it's the ignorance of people of the other. Freedom from suppression and freedom from fear. Fear that as a black man, you have to be cautious where you go. We want to live in the world where that freedom is guaranteed. These freedoms are the fundamental to the guarantee of human dignity of all citizens. On this Mandela International Day, I beseech all goodwill citizens of the world to join together to provide hope and a better life for all. Only when we open our hearts and our minds through education of our consciousness can we truly transform our societies. We should, my dear friends, show empathy and compassion for those who are not like us and those who are poor.
You doing? Yes, good. I've taken off my mask, and I'm gonna talk low so as to make sure I do proper social distancing with you. But I want to just, first of all, as I was saying this morning, I don't take it for granted that just because you're here and in this facility that you have to come out here and listen to me, especially come out here with an attitude of an open mind. But what I'm going to talk to you today about, the title of my talk today, what I'm going to share with you, it's called Turn the Cell into a Classroom, Turn the Prison into a University. So at 22 to 25, I was on a crime spree. When I got arrested, the judge looked at me. He said, "Young man, I spent 2 days trying to figure out how to sentence you. Man, my only regret is I cannot give you more time." He sentenced me to a maximum sentence of 75 years. I was 25 years old. I was 40 years old by the time I got out of prison. 15. And the 5 before that served a total of 20 years. While I was in prison the second time, I earned my bachelor's and master's degree from Boston University. You've already been told how powerless you are. You've already been told how the system is against you. You've already been told that it's going to be almost impossible to succeed. That's not my message. I recognize there's systemic injustice. I recognize that there's systemic racism. I recognize all those things, but here's what I want you to know that's more powerful than that. You. I want everyone in the room share one word that best describes you. One word that best describes you. I'm going to go around. Generous. Humble. Determined. Determined squared. Intelligent. Smart. Optimistic. Intelligent. Talented. Confident. Outgoing. Now listen to this. Of the words that were selected, not one person said lacking self-esteem, lacking self-discipline, lacking any of those things. You know why? Because when you're asked your best, you know what it is. You know what your best is. I have an organization called Reflecting Freedom Network. And with this organization, we created a program around education, accredited education, and employment training. So we have what's called a Nelson Mandela International Day Scholarship. I've already got scholarships for everyone here. All of you already have it. You didn't know it walking into the room, but you already have a scholarship for the program. So it is 100% free to you. But here's this is why I say to you, that part is the easy part. I'm removing every barrier that might make it difficult for you to succeed. That's the easy part, because I've been down this path. The most important part for you is going to be to do the work to earn it. That's right. That's right. Staying focused, carrying it through, not getting distracted, doing the work. You are more powerful than anything that has been created to destroy you. You are born to a destiny greater than any force that would come to destroy that destiny. And I'm committed to using my life and my resources to ensure that you have an opportunity to pursue the highest vision you have of yourself, because you deserve it. But you got to earn it. I can provide you with the opportunity. You're only going to get the outcome if you earn it. Let's do something extraordinary. Nelson Mandela said it always seems impossible until it's done. Let's do the impossible. Hi, Melissa. How are you today?
I'm well. I'm
Good.
well.
Good. Well,
It's nice to see you.
it's great to see you. And first, I'd just like to hear what you think about reconciliation, especially in this turbulent time.
I think it is important and I think it is powerful. And I certainly think, from my vantage point as a stakeholder in the criminal justice system, so often the justice system denies people harmed and people who offend the opportunity for reconciliation. And I know it can make all the difference. So I believe in it. I've always believed personally the power of I'm sorry. I believe it in my own life. I try to teach my children the power of both being able to say I'm sorry and the power to grant forgiveness. So I think reconciliation, I agree that it is something that has to come from within. It can't be forced. It can't be dictated by policy. But when it's genuine and when it does come from within people, what can come from it is incredible.
Wow.
It's peace that
Yes.
can come from it.
Exactly. And you know, when I think about your role in the context of the criminal justice system, it's, as a state attorney, it's a very powerful role. It's a role
It is.
I think of the major stakeholders when we're having conversations about criminal justice reform. And for me, the prosecutor's role is central. And do you see it that way?
I do. The prosecutor has immense power, and really within the confines of the law, but really enormous discretion. and how the prosecutor uses that power and that discretion can either further engender healing in a community, trust in the system, or if abused, it can have the opposite effect. So it's the prosecutor and the power that the prosecutor yields is incredibly important. That's why people who hold these positions of public trust have to maintain that trust. So we have to ensure that we are using our power and our discretion fairly, equitably, appropriately, and where we fail or make a mistake that we own it.
Knowing the fact that you have done this work on the ground, confronting all kinds of obstacles, people on all sides of the aisle politically, people with labels that it's very easy to call racist, who would be identified as part of the system of systemic racism, and yet you found a way to break through. And not just anecdotally or on a personal level, you found a way to break through and move the needle on criminal justice reform in the face of systemic racism. So for me, what you have done eclipses everything that we say systemic racism is intended to diminish. So I'd like your insight, Desmond, on how you took a path to confront systemic racism in the way that you did and to be so successful in doing so.
Wow. You know, just listening to you, I'm reflecting on what we were able to accomplish and how you're talking about probably one of the most controversial topics, of voting rights to people with felony convictions in the most controversial state, the state of Florida. Yeah. Actually, it's 3 states. Some people say it's 3 states in one. At a time or in an environment that breathed hate, fear, division, right? But yet we were able to actually, I guess, dice through all of that and emerge from that cesspool, right, with a victory that was just shrouded in love, forgiveness, and redemption, right? Where we were able to actually have people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, actually support this, right? And I tell folks that we had over 5.1 million people who voted for, our amendment, and that's 1 million more than voted for any person on that ballot. And we know that at least 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 also voted for our current governor, which shows a wide cross-section of support. And so those votes was not based on hate, they weren't based on fear. They was rather based on love. I think what was so important, right, was to be able to cut through, right? Now we acknowledge the racist history of felon disenfranchisement in this country. We acknowledge that. But we did not allow ourselves to be just defined just by that moment in history. Yes. But rather, we allow ourselves to actually expand that to include so many people, because the reality was, even though the original intent of felon disenfranchisement was specifically to target newly freed slaves, yes, right? The reality is, like a tumor left unchecked, it would grow throughout the rest of the body, and now everyone is infected, right? Absolutely. And so we were able to actually now show that there was like so much interconnectivity, which in a sense helped kind of knife through the racism, because the racism is really a limited sense of thinking, right? So we were able to actually elevate above that. And what transcends the racism to me is love. Yes. Right? and so be able to connect these people with someone who they loved, who was impacted by the system, and have them mobilize and organize around that with that thought in their head. And so it wasn't a primal response that was triggered in people when they thought about criminal justice, they thought about African Americans. No, when they thought about criminal justice, they thought about someone who they loved, right? And that's who they stood up for, and that's who they fought for. And we were able to be successful because of that.
First of all, I just think that is such a brilliant analysis and strategy in terms of how we build effective mass-based movements for justice, for social justice and human rights. And when you were saying that, I was just thinking of how Operation New Hope, Kevin, being aligned with the same principles of social justice, the same principles of restorative justice. And the work you've been doing and how we went to South Africa, and Dr. Mandela was absolutely overwhelmed. As we're looking at these protests and the whole idea of systemic racism, how has it impacted you? What has occurred to you in this historic moment with this incredible challenge to face racism like we never have before?
Well, kind of going back, so we started 21 years ago, right? When we began to do our work here in the urban core. And you used the word earlier, Desmond, which I think is so powerful, that proximity. We have to have something that either pulls us or how somehow we have this ability to get closer. Sometimes it's by accident, sometimes it is through the connection of love. It happens in a number of different ways. You don't even know how that systemic structural racism builds itself through conversation, by observance of other people that you love and that you hold in such high regard, acting in a way. And it's not necessarily that really horrific thing. It's the little subtleties, the nuances of not saying something, or wow, you were in a conversation and you didn't challenge somebody on that. And that is something that as you grow older and you're around that part of it. And so all of that was embedded in me. And so I went to a high school that had one African American in my graduating class. I had no relationship to understand any of the issues and the pain and the struggle that you would get in relationships of friends. And so 21 years ago, I went to my boss and I said, my dad, and I said, look, I just need to do something. I need some time to kind of explore some ideas. And that's when we started Operation Hope in 99. But I didn't know really anything, from the standpoint of these issues. And we started building houses. Initially, it was just about creating affordable housing. I didn't understand the nuances around what we had done, some of the components of systemic racism, what banks had done to redline. This area we're sitting was one of those areas. African Americans had to walk around this community, back 70 years ago. But now we were building houses here that were both, primarily for people of color. But what I began to see, what our organization began to see, was just all of the component pieces that had been born. I didn't know anything about the criminal justice issue, one of the other components of that systemic piece that I experienced in a big way. But when we began to do the credit to look at how we could get families and families of color into housing that we were building in urban core, just the impact of not having health insurance, and you have a kid or a family member that goes to Shands Hospital or goes to one of the hospitals with an emergency and then has a $80,000 bill that nobody's paying, and what stays on the credit for their entire life. And nobody has really acknowledged the fact, because of healthcare, now they've got a blemish that precludes somebody from having that American dream, the dream of home ownership. But we got to see that in the thousands of families that we worked with. That was one of the major components. And so, these are the little things that are, that are hitting. But what got me the most was, I began, as we were building these houses, we'd see every single day these young men and women, and a lot of people of color, were coming and saying, hey, do you need any help? Can we work on your job? And we would bring them on, because we were nonprofit and we were trying to rebuild a community, bring folks in. And then in time, to your point on that proximity piece, You know, I was hearing the same story that these young men were telling me about. I'd say, well, why aren't you working anywhere? Tell me a little bit. Well, I had a charge 3 or 4 years ago or 2 years ago, and people won't hire me. I'm like, what? You know, right, duh. But I kept hearing that story over and over again, and it really touched me. So I went back to the board and said, look, there's something powerful going on here, because what I learned is if I took on and brought in a young man and they worked for a couple of weeks, I could pick up the phone and call anybody in town, any contractor, and said, hey, by the way, I've got John over here, young man, he's got a record, but he's been showing up every day on time. I'll see him right now. Right. Now, if John would have gone and called on that guy on his own, on the slim to none, we know where that would have been. Right. And so I began to see, wow, just how hard it is to break, right? And also I said, for whatever reason, we had the ability to advocate on behalf of those who didn't have an advocate. Right. And it empowered us. I mean, our board, we ended up starting a nonprofit construction company so we could control our own destiny. We could hire who we wanted to hire. And that's when we began this move. But I got to tell you, it really touched my heart in the most incredible way, because I saw all these young men who were just like me. Right.
Kent, it's good to see you again.
It's mutual.
Yeah, it's last year. It's almost been, it's
been a year now.
A year. Nelson Mandela International Day last year, and the conversation with Dr. Mandela.
Yeah.
It was amazing. But look at how much has happened since then. COVID-19.
And we thought that was going to be the biggest deal of 2020.
Yeah.
No, not even close.
But I understand that you have started a conversation series.
Yeah.
A kind of truth and reconciliation conversations focused on how we can better understand each other. Yeah. And address this issue of racism and difference. Yeah. And ethnic divide. So I'm curious, Kent, with the position that you have of being an anchor and comfortable, a wonderful career and family, what inspired you personally to want to start this conversation series?
So I didn't intend to start a conversation series, but it became clear to me that conversations needed to happen. That's because one of my very dearest friends here in Jacksonville is a man who was struggling through that first week after George Floyd had been killed, who is a person I look up to and who is a leader and who I'd never seen been anything other than sure of his course in life. But we had a conversation on that Friday of that week after everything had happened in Minnesota. Friday of that week, he said, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to tell my adult children who live in Atlanta and who are scared to go outside right now. And it started the conversation, just him and me, about his experience as a black man, as a leader of a black family. And I wanted to understand more. And it really, that was kind of the inspiration there. One friend who said, I'm struggling with this and I don't know what to say. And it took me to a place where I was just reading a sports article, really. I thought it was just about sports. No, it was my favorite sports writer, who was a black man, who was talking about, hey, why is it my white friends can talk to me about the NBA finals, they can call me and have a chat about anything in the sports world, but this really important topic comes up, and then where are they? And I read that and I went, I don't want that to be me. I don't want to be silent on something that is so important. So that's really what started it. And out of that moment, Khalil, I just went, okay, I'm going to call those friends that I have who may look different than me, and I'm going to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm going to say to you, I care about you. You are my friend no matter what, and especially when we're talking about there are differences because of how we look, I want you to know that I'm on your side. The way these have gone has really, I enticed people to come, hey, we'll have some food, some beverage, and we will have a discussion here. A discussion about racial reconciliation is mandatory for whoever comes. I mean, that's the bottom line. And I'll usually start that, hey, let's talk some ground rules. Here's how we're going to discuss this. Yes. And we're going to be great listeners. And we're going to listen for and we're going to look for these things. And what I've found, Khalil, is that the conversation goes on its own for an hour or an hour and a half of people offering their experiences, offering their perspectives. And what's really cool is sometimes asking questions, hey, tell me more about that, because I don't see it that way. And just as powerful, oh, I just heard your perspective. I've never encountered that, and now my eyes are open. I see around me people who are on their own saying, oh, I need to look at this differently. Oh, I feel this differently. My neighbor came to one of our conversations, and during a conversation about the monuments coming down in Jacksonville, we're saying, hey, wait a second. I don't understand this. And as I've heard in other conversations, led his comments with, I don't have a racist bone in my body, yes, but, and then gave their opinion. And it struck me, just didn't realize maybe a racist bone in his body. Yes. And at the end of that conversation, at the end of that evening, this person told me, Ken, I'm going to have a hard time sleeping tonight.
Oh, yeah, I remember.
Because I didn't realize that I viewed it in that way. And now that I've heard people explain to me why that's offensive, why that's painful, why that hurts, I'm forced to look at things differently. And again, it goes back to, we built some relationship over the course of a few hours, and this person sharing their experience and this person sharing theirs, saying, okay, I can understand it differently.
Dr. Brown, it's really an honor to be able to talk with you today. This is a conversation for me that has so much significance in this historic moment. And so knowing the civil unrest and the backdrop of all the things happening in our country, I'm reminded that Nelson Mandela said, in the end, reconciliation is a spiritual process, which requires more than just a legal framework. It has to happen in the hearts and minds of people. When I think about that, and I look at your life and I look at the work that you're doing in education, given your positioning at this historic moment in an amazing school like KIPP, what do you think are the lessons from the life and legacy of Nelson Mandela that are instructive in this historic moment?
We can't legislate reconciliation, right? And reconciliation requires us to be proximate to one another. It requires us to be up close and personal. Up close and personal increases the opportunities that we're going to offend one another. We're going to bump into each other, run over one another, trip. It's messy, right? The work of reconciling is messy. There's so many components to it. It involves an acknowledgement that something wrong has occurred, right? For which we need to be reconciled to one another. And you're right, we are at this pivotal moment in human history. And I think we're just getting started in this moment. I don't think that any of this is going to die down. The protests might, but I think that this is long work that's going to continue to happen. And I've been thinking a lot, looking internally, doing lots of introspection, leading my organization, the schools, the school leaders, teachers, to be introspective as well. If what Nelson Mandela says is true, and this is a spiritual endeavor, we must turn inward first, right? We got to turn inward. And I'm thinking right now, Khalil, about where I fit in all of this. What's my part? What's been my part in perpetuating?
Wow.
What's been my part in perpetuating it, even as a Black woman? What's been my part in perpetuating it? What do I do? What's my responsibility to dismantle? So I'm thinking a lot about that and pushing us as an institution of schools where, oh, by the way, if we are going to have a conversation about what is happening right now, we're going to have a conversation about racism. It exists in schools. Schooling is an institution in this country. It exists in schools. So I'm pushing myself to really examine ourselves, examine our decision making, our motivation, our mindsets. This is an unprecedented time in history, and not just because of the pandemic. And how do I lead right now? Because it is messy, and I'm going to say some things. If I'm being my authentic self,
Yes.
I'm going to say some things that folks in my organization are going to be uncomfortable with. So how do I lead in this moment? How do I lead? Love is my default. Lead with love is my default. And loving does not preclude truth telling. So I banked on, these folks have known me for 5 years now. I've been here for 5 years. And if they really know me, then they know my heart for children. They know my heart for this work. So I shouldn't have to do a lot of explaining because I've been leading in this way for 5 years. And I had to say, mattering is the minimum for Black folks. Mattering is the minimum. That's table stakes, that Black people matter, the lives of Black people matter. I need everyone who works here to be committed to Black people winning and being successful. So not just the children that we are educating, and yes, we want to see that in test scores and in their academic performance. Bring that same fervor to how you feel about the communities that they go home to. Do you want their families to win? Because that's going to be requisite of your employment here. You got to want Black people to win and be successful. Mattering is a low threshold. That's a low bar. I'm doubling down on my commitment to racial equity, racial justice and equity. I'm doubling down. And here's what that's going to look like. I know those are words that can live up at 30,000 feet, but on the ground, here's what that's going to look like for us at KIPP Jacksonville Schools. We're going to go back and look at all of our talent practices and policies and make sure they're equitable. We're going to examine every facet of ourselves, how we choose to spend our money, where, with whom, the curricula that we select for children. Do they see themselves in the curricula? The disciplinary policies that we create, are they harmful? Like, are we perpetuating anti-Black policies? We're not going to do that. We can't say that we love our students and love their communities and then bring them into an environment where we are actually causing the trauma. We can't do that. So my leadership in this moment is loving us, loving the children and their communities enough to turn the microscope on ourselves and say, we got to sit under this microscopic gaze and analyze every decision that we make. I'm not a politician, I'm an educator. So that's where I'm gonna fight this battle. I'm gonna do it in schools. And for me, the road to reconciliation starts with listening.
25 years ago, you're looking at the problem. 25 years ago, I looked at a distance in our community and assumed a whole lot of all those conversations that I had heard in the past. Oh, so-and-so don't want to work, don't want to take care of the family, all of that. It was embedded, whether I liked it or not. But it all came face to face when I saw these young folks, and I will never ever, no matter what I do, understand that pain that you guys have gone through and people of color in those conversations. I can't, but I saw the blood in their footsteps as they walked away, Khalil. I saw that part of it, but I also saw in that this incredible resilience and this desire to be successful. Yes. And so, all that, and so you talking about becoming, animated in this process, it became, kind of the life mission for me, but it took these folks and the patience that these young folks had with me and others to say, okay, I need to explain this, which is a part of the problem that I'm still trying to reconcile in my own spirit, that it took so long to get to that place. COVID has created a space, as crazy as this time is for all of us with the civil unrest that we have and with the pandemic that's there. God, He doesn't create these moments, but He does create the opportunities for us in these moments to slow down and to pay attention. And I think the whole world right now is paying attention. And as I shared with you guys before we got on camera, the most beautiful part of this has been seeing, like, my niece, and her friends carrying Black Lives Matters posters, that their heart has been touched, and to see that love where it should be.
With the unrest, I want to juxtapose this with the marches that are happening right now. And knowing the emphasis that you've put on trust between communities and our legal system, our criminal justice system. How is this impacting you in your office?
Great question. In really profound ways, frankly. So internally, we are having lots of discussions about how people feel personally, what their personal experiences are about both the civil unrest and the demands, at least, of local demonstrators that specifically implicate our office and the work of our office. And those conversations sometimes are hard to have, but they're really important. And so externally, it's also the local demonstrations and the demands on our office specifically have really forced us to circle around the table and think about important issues that, frankly, were not on our priority agenda even 6 weeks ago, but are now. And so I have been, several weeks ago, I came to the office to watch a demonstration, and I will tell you, I was so moved by, in gratitude that I live in a country where we enjoy such freedom and the right to petition, that people can petition their government, and then the government can react. And we specifically, as it relates to, for example, the public release of body-worn camera footage, a very important topic, trending both nationally but locally as well. We've listened to the petitions of the people and are working to develop a policy that will actually be responsive to the petitions of the people. And so I, in watching this, at least locally, I've really felt a sense of gratitude for living in a country where this can occur. That said, I've also been sad to hear about some of the personal experiences of colleagues that have been my colleagues for a long time that I never knew about until conversations have been spurred because of this moment we find ourselves in.
Wow. So a level of honesty and openness
Sure.
to talk about race and diversity.
And the intersection of race and the justice system, and certainly, to your point, diversity.
Yes. Because I know the work that you have been doing in the space of criminal justice reform that goes beyond this moment. I know that it's not something that's just a fanciful kind of issue for you. I'm aware of the legislatively funded conviction review unit that you spearheaded. I'd actually like you to talk a little bit about that, because I think so often it's easy to just pigeonhole responses to what's going on, or it's easy to say someone's just doing something as a reaction to the moment. But I'd like to tease out your motivation for spearheading that legislatively funded initiative, which is leading the country actually in this space.
So when we talk about, again, the public trust and reconciliation, and the power of recognizing mistake and being accountable for mistakes, that's not just individually, that's systems, institutions. And so it was important to me and my administration that words can be empty, and this was a sign that we take this very seriously. And we did not seek the funding or set up this unit either for a PR stunt, and we didn't do it because we thought that there had been a great swath of mistakes we needed to rectify. What we didn't know, but we did it because we wanted people to have faith that where mistakes have been made, and this is a human system that depends on humans, and we all make mistakes, so that where we as a system had made mistakes, we were willing to review them and rectify them. We didn't know where the effort would lead us. As you are very familiar, it led us to overturn the convictions of two men who'd been in prison for almost 43 years, wrongfully convicted, and released from prison. And so I really think and hope that the public knows when when they're in a courtroom, when they're on the other side of us, adverse to us, that they have faith no matter the outcome, that we are acting with integrity. That's really important. And so this effort was important to that end. And it's important certainly for those two men, Nathan Myers and Clifford Williams.
Yes. And he said his prayers over all those years. He wept as he told the story. And Dr. Mandela last year was so moved by that story and the action that you took that she personally gave Clifford a set of the Struggle series, artwork from her father. So
it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, she was just in tears. And she said her comment was that this is how justice can work.
And I struggle when we talk about this is how justice can work. I'm like, what is just about the fact that they lost decades of their lives that we can't get back? And they're both so optimistic about that there was a purpose.
Yes.
They're an instrument of something larger.
Yes.
And all that they lost and sacrificed was for meaning that maybe we can't fully understand right now. But certainly the value and the initiative of the conviction integrity is borne out in those two men.
Melissa, to hear these stories as people talk about racism and injustice and personal stories, the personal things. How has it affected you?
It's made me wonder why I didn't know about these things before. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I didn't ask about it before. Or was there a space where people felt comfortable to talk about their personal experiences? And it's underscored for me how important diversity within our ranks is, not just in race and gender, though that's very important, but in life experience. Because if we all share a very similar life experience and see the world through a very similar lens, and we don't reflect the community that we are sworn to serve every day, that's not good for anybody. And so it's really also underscored the importance of, in our recruitment efforts, melding a incoming class that demonstrates a spectrum of life experience. I think that's important.
How do you think we should revise the policies on juvenile justice, right? And I told him, I said, listen, I'm not the expert. I have some members of my organization that have been direct filers juveniles and been working on this issue. I would be happy to have you speak with them. But let me give you a starting point, right? And here was a very simple starting point. For anyone that wanted to fix a policy, a change of policy, or a condition, it was very simple. I looked at the gentleman, you know what I told him? Imagine if your son made a transgression, how would you want him to be treated? And that would set the foundation for the policies that you should advocate for, right? Now, that connection there was love. The action, the initial action that I use for others is to connect them with someone who they love, right? I'm not expecting them to love me immediately, right? They may reject me because of the color of my skin, but that initial seed is connecting them to someone that they love. And so when I would approach a person that could have biases, racial biases, and I have, and I've approached people with political biases, I have, right? It wasn't a question about the politics. It wasn't a question about me. The question was, do you have someone who you love who ever made a mistake? And that oriented them, right, around love, and it was an immediate connection with someone that they had a relationship with. And that was the guiding force. So in spite of any negative ads, in spite of any contrary narrative, what they had as their North Star was the love of someone that they cared about or that was close to them. And in that love, that allows them now to get in a space to where we can have even further communication, and that person now develops a love, not only for the person that's close to them, but someone else who just entered into their universe.
So when we look at this broader context of civil unrest, and you're saying the listening, this courageous listening, we both know in the education space, children are always listening.
That's right.
When we think they're not listening, they're listening.
Yes.
So, and they're listening to things that we don't think we're telling them.
That's right. That's
right? So they've been hearing, I can't breathe. They've been hearing, they've been listening to the words, I can't breathe. How have you, as an educator and a leader in this space, how have you addressed that with the young people, the young lives, the impressionable souls that you are guiding?
Oof. Can I start with the big people first?
Yes.
And then we'll talk about the little people. So March early March, we ended up, of course, having to leave the school buildings due to COVID-19 and were remote for 9 weeks up until the end of the school year. And about 2 weeks before the end of the school year, the murder of George Floyd occurred. And everything, we've all been watching everything that has ensued since then. And Khalil, I was wrestling with how to lead the adults because school ended.
Yes.
And I'm wrestling with it's going to be summer break. Teachers need the summer break. They've just been through the most tumultuous end to a school year ever. They need a summer break. There's some of us who work year round, but we had, I think, one of the most powerful team meetings we've ever had in 5 years that I've been here. And it was differentiated. So I said to the Black folks on the team, this is your question to answer. How are you prioritizing your peace and your healing? That's your question. White teammates, here's your question. How are you addressing racism with your white friends, family members, with white community? How are you addressing that? And it was such a powerful conversation that we ended up having. I think years of trust building helped facilitate the ease of that conversation. But at the end of the call, one of our Black men on staff, he is the epitome of tough guy. He's on our operations team, so very logistical, starts talking and talks about rage, the Baldwin quote. Yes. To be a Negro and relatively conscious in America is to be almost always in a state of rage. So he talks about this, how he's just angry right now. And then he breaks down in tears. On a call there are 30 of us on this call, he breaks down into tears because he's talking about his son, Max. He and his wife have an 18-month-old baby. And he breaks down into tears and he says, I am so fearful that somebody will look at him, make a judgment about Max. There's nothing I can do to protect him. And I'm like, I don't even get to enjoy being a father because I'm already worried that somebody will take his life. And I was messed up. I have heard my husband say this all the time. I have a stepson who's grown, and I've heard my husband replay over and over encounters with the police, his worries for his own son. And in a moment, I thought to myself, oh my gosh, this might not have been the right conversation for us to have. I don't want this Black man to be out here now, his pain vulnerable and visible for everybody. And then I thought, I wonder how many of our white teammates have ever seen a Black man that they know intimately, up close and personal, weep out of fear that he can't protect his son, that he doesn't even get to enjoy fatherhood. That's what I mean, Khalil, when I say listening. It's got to start with the listening. It's raw. It is painful. They needed that. My white teammates needed that. Some of the Black men needed that because they don't even have the words to articulate their fear, their rage, how powerless they feel.
I do believe, though, that we human beings have the innate ability to rise above our limitations. And our limitations often are based on discrimination, on anger, on fear, on bitterness, and we can rise above that by always existing in an environment and atmosphere of love, by waking up every morning and looking at ourselves in the mirror and asking, Mikey, how are you going to be better today than you were yesterday? What is the one thing today that you are going to do that is good, that is going to make somebody's life better? It might be just saying hello. Those little acts of kindness that we have to express on a daily basis. And these are not things that are foreign to us as human beings, because this concept of Ubuntu that we South Africans pride ourselves is about caring, which Nelson Mandela actually preached and lived throughout his life. Because when he was president, he gave a third of his salary away. He made sure that he built schools because he believed in education for everybody, and that's how you uplift the poor out of poverty, by giving them a hand up, which is giving them access to education.
You know, it's not the destination, it's the journey, and understanding that the work that we do, we're gonna make mistakes along the way, right? We're gonna get some setbacks, we're gonna have some victories, but we don't stop there, right? Because this is a process that's ongoing. And I think that that's the beauty of it, you know, and I think we embrace that, you know, because that, you know, it's the journey that I think that can bring us together, right? And the more people we can have going on this journey, oh my God, the greater the experience.
When everybody's asking that question right now, black and white, is this going to be another moment in time where nothing changes? We've got such a tremendous roadmap in what Nelson Mandela did in South Africa. You know, the yoke of apartheid was heavy, and it took a lot, you know, uncomfortability, between, to say the least, between the blacks and the whites in South Africa. And the persistence that Nelson Mandela and all of those folks that were with him in the movement never let go. There was that consistency, that intentionality. I only hope and pray that that's where we are today. And I believe it will be. I believe it will be if we continue these conversations.
And one of the biggest wins, if you will, out of this is a friend who told me just last weekend, Ken, I'm glad we had that conversation a couple of weekends ago, because I've realized I need forgiveness for this. I've thought about this the wrong way. I didn't think about it at the time, but I acted that way. I need forgiveness for this. And it's been powerful, because there's an awakening or something going on for so many of us, so many of our neighbors who say, I guess maybe I'm open to looking at this a different way now. Yes. And that's huge.
That's the work. It's hard work, it's painful work. I'm not even qualified to take us through those conversations, but they have to happen. It means that I am gonna hear some things that make me angry, sorrowful, and I'm gonna have to listen to folks who might be in different stages of a journey than I am, and listen with compassion, and listen with a lot of grace and patience. So for me, it all starts with the listening. And then from the listening, maybe we become curious, because we actually stopped talking enough to seek to understand one another. And if I become curious, then I might actually want to learn something. And, you know, we've got this quote downstairs on the first floor: education is the most powerful weapon with which we can change the world. That's right. And it's not just the education that happens in the formal, you know, K through 12 or through college. That education can happen anywhere, but for me, it really does start with listening. That's how we get to reconciliation.
When I think about truth and reconciliation, one of the things that comes to mind for me is that forgiveness takes one person, reconciliation two. The idea of truth and reconciliation is that regardless of the fact that many of us come to this conversation with irreconcilable experiences, truth and reconciliation conversations invites us to be courageous listeners. It invites us to be compassionately empathetic, hearing the stories of others, hearing their experiences with racism. Then what we're able to do with truth and reconciliation conversations is begin a process of healing that moves us beyond the woundedness and allows us to hear in each other's voice our shared humanity.